One Heat Minute Productions presents Guide for the Film Fanatic, the podcast where we invite a guest to pick one movie from Danny Perry's seminal 1986 film reference book and talk to us about that movie. I'm your host, Jason Bailey, and across the mic and across the country from me is my co-host,
Michael Hall.
Our guest today, you guys, this is a real treat. He's the acclaimed author of several indispensable film books, including Grindhouse, The Forbidden World of Adults-Only Cinema, Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir, and Dark City Dames, The Wicked Women of Film Noir, which is back on shelves this Tuesday in a revised and expanded edition. He's also the founder and president of the Film Noir Foundation, and of course, the host of Noir Alley on Turner Classic Movies. Folks, please welcome the czar of noir, Mr. Eddie Muller. Hello, sir.
Hi, how are you guys? It's good to see you again.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here. We always promise when someone's here to sell a book that we'll start by talking about the book. So let's talk about this edition of Dark City Dames. It was originally published in 2001. As I mentioned, this is a revised and expanded edition. So what exactly does that entail? How was the book revised and expanded for this new publication?
Right off the bat, you already got one thing kind of off about the revised. No. It's fine. It's fine. This is an interesting point because you said that I had written Dark City Dames, The Wicked Women of Film Noir, but the new edition is actually called The Women Who Defined Film Noir. Dark City Dames, The Women Who Defined Film Noir. For I think what are probably fairly obvious reasons. I mean, the publisher, changed nothing in the text aspect of the book, but they did want to change that Wicked Women to The Women Who Defined Film Noir, and I think it shows you in the however many years that is now, 24 years that have passed since the original publication of the book, that the culture's attitude about women and the role they played in Hollywood back then, and it's just changed to the point where they felt we might be playing into some kind of now anachronistic stereotype to just leave it as the Wicked Women of Film Noir.
Yeah,
and I didn't argue it. I mean, I don't know that the new subhead is any more accurate than the previous subhead, but
sure.
But I'm more interested in what's between the covers of the book than what's on the front of the book necessarily. So what's new about it is there are 10 additional actresses who are profiled in the book. But I would be remiss to, if I didn't say the major difference is I interviewed and knew very well the 6 women whose profiles make up the bulk of the book. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The 10 new profiles, which I was very happy with. I knew some of those women, Marcia Hunt and Rhonda Fleming, and I did know Claire Trevor a little bit before she passed away. But I did not interview those people for the book. Right. And some of them are long since gone. Gail Russell and Peggy Castle. But I found it very interesting that, for let's face it, there are people who weren't born. I'm hoping there are people who are going to be reading this book who were not born when the first part came out,
Sure.
So, there will be some surprises in those new profiles, I am sure. And it was, because I interviewed and knew all the women, it's pretty obvious how their stories turn out when you're reading the book, right? They were alive to tell me their stories. That's not necessarily the case with the 10 other women that I profile. So I'm sure it'll be, some of those tales will have shocking endings for some people who read the book.
Understood. At risk of asking a huge question that I'm sure that you kind of spend a chunk of the book answering, what is it about the femme fatale that has captured, our collective imagination for so long?
I think you're asking the essential question about life on Earth or something. I mean, it's like the eternal fascination with women. I mean,
Yeah.
that's basically it, you know. And I
Hmm.
know that these are, you know, these days it's all a minefield talking about this kind of stuff, but it is the truth. I always joke with people when they say, "Oh, it's not really a film noir if there isn't a femme fatale," and I say, "Yeah, it is a film noir. It's just the noir films we love
Right.
have the great femme fatales in them. I mean that,
Right.
and the appeal is pretty obvious. I think, the
Hmm.
men don't understand women.
Right.
I mean that's like number
Right.
one, right? And
Sure.
so the femme fatale is like a just a an offshoot of that. It's just like, oh my God, are they trying to destroy me, or what makes this person tick?
Right.
And and so that's a big part of what the book is about, is like
Hmm.
exploring the real people behind, actresses played these roles and created these archetypes, and how are they similar and dissimilar, and what a weird way to make a living doing that
Hmm.
in the first place, right? So that was sort of, and for me personally, writing the book was such it's the most involved I ever got in writing a book. Obviously, I was dealing with six women who were all eager to tell their stories and had
Hmm.
never really had the opportunity to tell their stories before. And it was a fascinating experience, and one that changed my life. I can put it that way.
That's fantastic. It feels to me like film noir has something of a higher profile, a greater visibility now, thanks in no small part to your efforts, than it did when, say, the book was first published. Is that assessment accurate? And if so, did it change how you approached this edition of the book in any way?
Um, yes, I agree with your initial assessment there. I think that the average person today knows what film noir is, or thinks
Yeah.
they know what film noir is,
Right.
whereas that wasn't the case 25 years ago.
Sure.
And a large part of that has to do with technology. It has
Hmm.
to do with digital technology, and it has to do with Turner Classic Movies. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
not going to take the credit for this, but there was not 25 years. I mean, Turner Classic Movies has been around for 30 years.
Right.
25 years ago, it was in its early stages, right? So people weren't as familiar with all of these films, and the
Hmm.
films weren't readily available in any form that people could watch at home. And so I
Right.
remember when I was doing the book originally, I was starting to program film festivals, and we would show a film. Let's just take The Narrow Margin or something like Tension with Audrey Totter, for example.
Okay.
And we would advertise this as not on DVD.
Hmm.
You can't see this at home.
Right.
And let's face it, when I started doing this book and programming festivals, DVDs had just come in. Most everything, when I was doing research, I did it with VHS tapes,
Right.
and not everything had been put out on VHS. But DVD was like a brand new thing, and
Hmm.
I could promote these films saying not available on DVD. Well, now they're all available, and now the people are asking, when is it going to be on Blu-ray? I've had the DVD for years. When are they going to put it out on Blu-ray?
Yeah.
So, and I will say, just to get on my soapbox, jump on for 1 second, uh,
Please.
keep those DVDs and Blu-rays.
Hmm.
To
Hmm.
keep the physical media. I see you've got a
Yeah.
shelf full of physical media behind you there.
Yeah. Yes,
Uh,
sir.
yeah, do not trust the streaming services to turn. They could very easily turn off the tap, and
Yeah.
you won't be able to see these things. So don't trust that they'll always be there on a streaming service. You want to have the physical media.
Absolutely. And what's great about film noir now is that it has I feel like acquired such a sort of a following and such a brand name that now like they bring out a box set and it's just like Film Noir volume, Out of the Darkness volume 22. And they may be films you've never heard of. They may be directors or not you, but films I've never heard of.
No,
but
no,
like,
I know exactly what you're saying. And even if it isn't film noir, they're going to call it film noir because that's going to help sell it. Yeah,
exactly. So like, imagine that now it's, it's a sort of a market, it's a brand almost, which seems strange to say.
That's a very interesting observation, but, and it's completely true. Anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure, as we go along.
Sounds good. All right. Well, what film, Mr. Muller, did you select to discuss today?
Well, I selected The Breaking Point, which is interesting because none of the women in my book are in this movie. But when I saw the movie on the list of available titles to discuss, I said, "Oh yeah, The Breaking Point. Let's talk about that because I love it." So.
I didn't believe it when you told me you were in love with him.
A man can be in love with his wife and still want something exciting to happen.
There's just good, just fire line after fire, just heater after heater after heater in this movie. Every couple of minutes, it's like jokes in a fucking Mel Brooks movie. Like constant great lines.
Yeah. Well, I also do love a moment where, a cigarette is lit and it's such an obvious stand-in for sex. It's great.
Some good smoking in this movie.
It's a great smoking movie.
But try to find it in Harry Morgan, two-fisted skipper in whose wake lies a trail of adventure that has taken him to strange...
I did also like the part when he walked into a bar and introduced himself as Captain Morgan. I was like, hey!
Yeah. Yes.
The deadly threat of guns, the greater menace of a reckless woman.
The greater
Every
menace
challenge
of a
drawing him
reckless
deeper
woman.
and deeper into a whirlpool of hazardous intrigue. It's John Garfield as Harry Morgan, who sold his courage
There's
to
that whole scene. I mean, there's that whole Breaking Bad scene where he's like, I do it for the family. And she's like, don't say that. You're full of shit. You do it for yourself. Like, I was like, this is the Breaking Bad scene.
They wouldn't have set a time without making sure about me.
She's got something for me. We're something together.
Spoils everything else for me.
How do you know till you try?
Ooh.
Patricia Neal is incredible in this movie.
Now, let's see the
Electric.
color of it, Mr. Singh.
I have the rest of the money right here.
That woman who's like smarter than every man she meets. And like, she's got that look on her face that like, she's smarter, that she's never met a man who is anywhere approaching her sort of wit. Right? And she's just got that face for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, heartbreaking.
Good trailer.
God, that haircut scene is just,
Oh yeah.
Okay, we'll get to that.
Okay, yeah. That's. I think I said it at somewhere along the line writing about this film. At one point, I did say that I thought that Patricia Neal might be the most believable femme fatale in a noir film, because she fulfills all aspects of that archetype in this film, but she's a very human character. I mean, you get her motivations, and I don't want to cut to the end here too soon if we're going to discuss the movie. But there is a beautiful scene where she and Garfield kind of recognize each other, and that they're just trying to survive, and that he says, all I have is my guts. All I'm selling is guts. And all she's selling is really her sex appeal, and that's what's going to keep her head above water, And it's a very, very human variation on the femme fatale character. And also, I know I'm going to let you lead the discussion here, but
no, please.
But I'm so one of the things I love about this movie so much is that it has two really great female characters.
Yes.
Because invariably the most thankless role in a noir film is the wife, is the long-suffering wife, right? But Phyllis Thaxter is incredibly great in this movie, and the way that character is written is fabulous.
Yes.
and her performance is amazing. And as Michael, you already pointed out, the reveal scene with the where Phyllis Thaxter shows that she's gotten her hair cut and bleached to be quote unquote sexier for her husband is like one of the great
When I
moments.
was 25, that scene wouldn't have meant anything to me. But as a married man in his 40s, I was fucking heartbroken watching that. I
Yeah.
mean, that just is like, oh my God, that's heavy. And one of those things that, like, they don't even really have to talk. And there's sort of a bare minimum of words in the scene. Even with the kids are like, we're going to be a laughing stock. And she's like, fuck you, get out. Like, and they didn't need him. And they knew that. They knew they didn't need him.
Yeah. And the kids are
Yeah.
good. The kids are really good characters in the movie as well. Yeah, including
really are.
Juano Hernandez's own son, who plays his son in the movie. It's pretty great.
Yeah. So the film, yes, is The Breaking Point, released in 1950. It was a film adaptation of Ernest Hemingway's To Have and Have Not. But hang on, Jason, you might say. Hadn't Bogey and Bacall and Hawks just made a film version of To Have and Have Not in 1944? And the answer to that would be yes, sort of. The Hawks film and its screenplay by Jules Furthman and William Faulkner was barely an adaptation at all, and in fact had frankly more in common with Bogey's Casablanca than with much of anything in Hemingway. The Breaking Point, which in an odd bit of circularity is helmed by Casablanca director Michael Curtiz, takes another crack at the story. And for some thoughts on that, Mike, what does Danny Perry say about The Breaking Point in Guide for the Film Fanatic?
Is that William Faulkner? Like William Faulkner?
That's William Faulkner,
They're asking him to rewrite Hemingway. That's one of those things that, like, I just don't.
that?
Remember when Starbucks tried to put olive oil in coffee? And it was like, these are two great things. And they don't. Why would anybody think to mix them? I'm just not sure that was. It's just one of those things that seemed like a good idea at lunch, but I don't know if that was really a good idea.
These novelists had mortgages to pay. They had ex-wives to support, and Hollywood had some nice big paychecks for them. All right, what does Danny say?
Everybody's got kids. Sorry, Danny says, excellent remake of To Have and To Have Not. There's no second two. Does everybody always read it with the second two? I feel like everybody always adds the second two. All right, let me start over. Excellent remake of To Have and Have Not, with John Garfield as California boat captain Harry Morgan. If Ronald McDougall's script for Michael Curtiz doesn't resemble Hemingway's novel any more than Faulkner's script for Howard Hawks' 1944 film did, at least it conveys more of its spirit. God, he's so good. He's so good. This is a rare film to present the World War II veteran as a disillusioned, financially troubled, forgotten man, kin to our doughboys during the Depression. Cynical Garfield finds that his charter boat business isn't bringing in enough money, and that some of the spark has gone out of his marriage to Phyllis Thaxter, although he loves her and their two daughters. And perhaps he longs for some of that excitement of war rather than his life of bills to pay and familial spats. It makes sense that, having reached his breaking point, he dares get involved with lawbreakers, risks his life to make a bundle of money in a hurry, contemplates an affair with a loose woman, Patricia Neal. And probably everything would go smoothly if he weren't a moral man. Boom. That sentence weighs a ton. Picture is well acted, nicely shot, partly on location by Ted McCord, smartly written. It has an exciting climactic action sequence and a classic final shot. Produced by Jerry Wald, also with Juano Hernandez as Garfield's partner, Wallace Ford, Edmund Ryan, Ralph Dumke, Sherry Jackson, and Victor Sin-Young.
So let's actually, because he mentioned it, let's start at the end. That final shot is,
oh my God,
a knife to the heart. And
I think it's probably the most heart-wrenching final shot I've ever seen in a movie. I'm just going to say that.
I can't think of I mean, like, you know, the shot of like Aguirre, Wrath of God, like, but that's not the same. Like, that's all
it's
about,
not the
right?
same.
Like, there's
something so primal about you know, it's not even, I was going to say, if you're a human being, it's not even if you're a human being, it's just you're a sentient creature. Right. And you just realize that you're now completely alone in the world, and your only connection to sanity in reality has disappeared. And it's Of course, people who haven't seen the movie don't really know what we're talking about, I guess. But I don't know what your rules of engagement are.
I mean, I feel like we can sort of describe what happens without it really even being a spoiler, because if you haven't experienced the movie, I'm not sure that knowing the sort of facts of that, and I don't want to I think you're probably the best person to answer this question. I don't want to make it political, but is there some element of taking this moment of desperate humanity and placing it in this black boy? Was there a point being made there that maybe isn't clear to us now? Or am I just trying to put it there?
No. I mean, I can tell you, I'll address it this way. The major difference between Hemingway's novel and this adaptation is Garfield's treatment of African American characters. I mean, I don't know if you guys have read Hemingway's novel, but it's
been a while.
Acutely racist.
Yeah.
And I know he's just writing of the time. I'm not saying that he was going out of his way to be racist, but it's just such casual racism in the book, which was written in 1937. And between us, and everybody listening to this program, I think that book is fascinating, but not a good book, not a good book at all. And I really believe that Hemingway was drunk when he wrote it. And I mean, everything I know about him, I think he was at loose ends writing that book, because it had been 6 years since he wrote A Farewell to Arms. And I actually think that in the book, midway through the novel, Harry Morgan loses his arm. And I honestly believe that Hemingway, it was like a drunken joke when he's writing this manuscript. He'd say, "I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I'll never achieve the success of A Farewell to Arms." So almost as a gag, he cuts off the arm of his lead character.
A literal farewell to arms.
Farewell to arms? Here you got farewell to arm right here. And of course that ends up being a major plot point in the breaking point, which is the conclusion of the film, and done so effectively, so brilliantly in the movie, where it's just kind of a throwaway in the novel. Why does he lose his arm? I mean, we're not entirely sure what the purpose of it is in the novel, but they make it his admission that, and since you've dropped a few F-bombs already here, Mike, I feel like I have the freedom to do that.
Floor's open.
Because the line in the novel that Hemingway said was the genesis of the whole story was when Harry Morgan says, "A man alone ain't got a bloody fucking chance." He says it a few times in the novel. A man alone ain't got a bloody fucking chance. And that becomes the essence of the end of the movie, is he accepts that he can no longer be a man alone, because he has to sacrifice his arm. His wife's telling him, "You're going to die if you don't do it." And far from being the act of emasculation that he thinks it's going to be when he loses his arm, it's actually the thing that reunites him with his wife and shows that they're going to get through everything together, which is not supposed to be an ending that you get in a quote unquote film noir. But then after they do that, the little kicker they have is that shot of the kid coming out on the wharf wondering, "Where's my dad?" And none of the white characters even see the kid. Right. And it's I
watched a movie with my wife, and she was big mad because we were both enjoying the movie very much, and then we got to the end and she's like, "Nobody's gonna put an arm around this kid." My wife was like, "This movie was great, but fuck that ending." She was very, very upset about the end. And I kept sort of saying, well, that is just sort of evidence that it was really effective,
It's interesting you say that, because I find that always surprises me. Even to this day, I've been doing this a long time now, and it always surprises me when I find people who say, "Oh no, I liked," because on Noir Alley, I will occasionally say, this was a great movie up until the end. And then they kind of drop the ball right at the end, and I invariably say that when it's like a tacked on fake uplifting
Right.
ending. Like it's not going to end so badly. And I hate those endings generally. And I always am amazed when people write to me and say, "How dare you?" I mean, I wanted them to get together at the end. I loved that ending. That was the best part of the movie. And I'm always like, wow, people really do want they want to feel good.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to leave a movie feeling better than when they went in. They don't like it when they feel worse than when they went in.
Well, part of what jumped out to me so hard about her saying that was like, I am just sort of like, no, that wasn't just one of the great scenes in this movie. That was one of the great finishes, period. Yeah. And so I'm just like so sort of like stuck in it. And then all of a sudden just pipes up out of the couch. That sucked. That was awful. I hated that. I was just sort of like, whoa, like I was very surprised, but it was we both had sort of equal levels of emotion about it, which that's the sign, right? That's how you know.
Yeah, and just quickly to just backtrack and make sure I've made this point properly. There were no black characters in Hemingway's novel, right? I mean, in Garfield, when he did this, said. Because Harry Morgan had 2 second mates in the novel, and they were both just obnoxious, reprehensible characters, right?
Good.
And he said, "No, I'm gonna have the guy be black. My second mate, Wesley, is gonna be black."
All right, John Garfield.
And this was something that Garfield did fairly regularly.
Right.
Like when he did Body and Soul, he cast Canada Lee as Ben, the washed up boxer that the gangsters had abused, and he hired him on, and he did that for Canada Lee because Hollywood had turned on him, and they didn't give good roles to black actors. They played porters, they played drivers.
Yeah,
all
this
this
is 1950. Like this is not even sort of the Portier era yet, let alone.
No, and Garfield really did. In many ways, he sort of set the table for because Sidney Poitier was right around the corner. I mean, he was in fact this. I mean, he did No Way Out. 20th Century Fox, virtually the same year. And James Edwards was making movies, and there were older, like Rex Ingram was an older black actor, but this was a thing for Garfield. I mean, it was something he really believed.
We're closer to Gone with the Wind than Shaft. I mean,
right,
right,
yeah.
That's absolutely
Eddie,
right.
Talk to us a little more about John Garfield as an actor. Like, what do you think made him so special as a screen presence and so engaging too? I know this is such a sort of lazy thing to say, but he feels like the acting he's doing here and throughout his career is closer to kind of a contemporary style than a lot of his peers. Is that accurate?
I completely agree. Okay. I think I would put it very simply. He seemed like a street kid who became an actor.
He's predicting Brando.
Which is what he was. Exactly. Yeah. And let's not forget that Elia Kazan wanted to cast him in A Streetcar Named Desire.
Oh shit.
And
okay.
And Garfield did this instead.
Wow.
Wow. So and so if he had taken that role and Brando hadn't, I mean, I think Brando is undeniable that he would have eventually been Brando regardless.
Definitely.
But I think that was it, that he was a street kid, and he always, even when he went to Broadway and said, acting seems like a way to make a living, because he was a roughneck, as a kid. Yeah. And I think he never lost that. Even when he understood how to study a role and do he never adopted a total, he wasn't a method actor,
Mm-hmm.
but he retained that street kid quality, and that is what I think set him apart. I always called him the Jewish Jimmy Cagney. To
Mm.
me, that kind of defined. He had that same kind of energy. Like he's
Yeah.
like, I don't know what this guy is, but he can do a lot, but he doesn't seem that polished. Like
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Cagney, as much of an entertainer as he was, and he could dance and he could do everything,
Right.
he did seem like an Irish street punk underneath it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's an unpredictability that underlines all of his work, and that I feel in a lot of Garfield's work as well.
Yeah. I think that Cagney is a little more theatrically inclined than Garfield. Just
Sure.
by which I just mean he there can be a staginess about Cagney's performances that I don't feel in Garfield's performances.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Talk to us a little bit about the narration here, which is, as we all know, is sort of one of the go-to tropes of film noir. In this, there is not much of it, but I feel like it's used really effectively. Where do you fall on this?
I think this is a beautifully. I think Reynold McDougall's screenplay is absolutely brilliant. It's better than Hemingway's book. I mean, it's way better because it understands plot points. And Hemingway's novel, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and say it was an experimental novel rather than saying it was a bad book. Perhaps I should say it was an experimental novel.
That's very kind.
But I think that McDougall, and I want to give him credit for being the impetus behind the creation of this movie. Okay. Because he was the one who realized that Warner Brothers still owned the novel, but he had read it, and then when he saw Hawks's version of it, he said, "This isn't even the book. This has no similarity to it other than the title. Right. This is like a world apart." And so he went to Jerry Wald and said, "We've never actually adapted this novel. I'd like to take a crack at doing it the way it was originally written." Well, not the way it was originally written, because he improved it, I think.
Sure.
But I think his writing is, everything he did was, to me, brilliant. Like Leona Charles, the Pat Neal character, is completely McDougall's creation.
Oh, wow.
She does not exist in the Hemingway novel.
Okay.
Women like her exist in the novel, but he took all these little bits and pieces that Hemingway had written, and he created this one fully fleshed out character who is just brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. Just she's a, you're right that the sort of the difference between her and your traditional femme fatale is that she's a grinder. She's just like out there doing whatever she can to get by. And that humanity really does come through.
Yeah. Good way of putting it. She's a grinder, and yeah, she wants to, climb out of the kind of dismal social station she's in. And she thinks she's only going to do that by attaching herself to somebody with money. And she's done it so often that it's just the way she behaves. And so she's behaving that way to Garfield, even, and he's kind of like, "What makes you think I got any money?"
Right.
But then it's just like, she has to prove her worth by making him succumb. Like, he is going to surrender to me, and
just so I know I got it. Just so I know he could.
And to me, that's totally fascinating that it doesn't happen. Yeah. This is one of these stories where it's like you're waiting for that moment. Like, isn't that going to be the plot twist, that he actually has sex with this woman and ruins his marriage? But he doesn't. He doesn't.
And we're so happy for it. There's not like a moment where you're sort of like, "Oh, this movie would be better if he would just go ahead and bang this blonde lady."
Well,
like,
that's
please don't.
I know. That's what I read. And I love the scene that McDougall wrote where they go back to her place, and they have that little thing where he admits that, and she says, and there's that wonderful line where he says, "I love my wife." And she goes, and she's like waiting for it. And he goes, "Aren't you going to say the butt?" I love my wife, but
Mhm. Yeah.
and the butt
Yeah.
doesn't come.
Yep.
That was just
Yep.
a fabulous scene.
Yep. It seems like, and we haven't talked about him much today, but it seems like Michael Curtiz is weirdly not discussed as much among the great filmmakers of this era these days, at least not compared to, Hawks or Hitchcock or Ford or Capra. But he made some of the best movies of this period, including, like sort of the definitive Hollywood movie of the war years. It's not that he had like an invisible style or something. Why do you think he's not elevated to the sort of the pantheon these days?
Because he didn't have a life story that attracted people who write about movies. Well, and I'm going to say that my colleague Alan Rohde took care of that because he wrote the biography of Michael Curtiz that addressed just what you were talking about, and that was Alan's entire reason for doing that book. You just explained it. Like, why doesn't anybody talk about Curtiz? But this is true, I believe, of a lot of filmmakers. The guys who got overlooked in terms of reputation were the guys who didn't have tumultuous lives. They weren't larger than life characters, right? I mean, how many biographies are going to be written about Orson Welles?
Right.
I think we're like at 12 or 13 and counting, right? Has there been a biography about Robert Wise?
Right.
No. Robert Wise just made the best movies anybody made in Hollywood, right? Was there a big biography about William Wyler? Not really. And now Alan fixed this about Michael Curtiz, but that's the thing about these guys who don't have tempestuous love affairs, and they're not autocrats, and they don't have reputations like Otto Preminger or Fritz Lang or somebody. I mean, they tend to get sidelined a bit, I mean, I've always I've named, like, in my estimation, 3 of the best film directors in the history of Hollywood: William Wyler, Robert Wise, and Michael Curtiz. These guys can make movies in any genre. They can do anything. They were brilliant, but they also kind of have, not the reputation as like the great auteur filmmaker or whatever. They're not thought of in the same way as like a John Ford or a Hawks or a Wells or somebody, and it is kind of unfair, but I think it speaks more to what people like to write about than it speaks to their talent as filmmakers. I just think Robert Wise is as good as it gets in Hollywood. I mean, he's done everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Boy.
Like you could say Robert Wise made one of the 5 best films in every genre that there is.
Yeah.
And yet there's no bio. There's no nothing. People are always like, "Oh, I forgot Robert Wise." Yeah, of course. And the same thing is true of Curtiz. And I happen to think that The Breaking Point is maybe his best directed movie. I don't think there is a misstep in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say and I'll put this in the show notes. There's a wonderful video, about a 20-minute video of you and Alexander Payne talking about this movie.
Yes.
Which is a wonderful conversation because he's, of course, so erudite and so knowledgeable. The thing that you guys talked about that I didn't realize was that for a good long while, this movie was sort of out of circulation. Like, this movie was really hard to see for a really long time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember doing that conversation with Alexander. That was how nice that you found that. He was actually he was in Greece. He was actually in Greece when we had that conversation. I was right where I am right now talking to you guys, but he was in Greece. And I give him full credit for being the guy who sort of unearthed this film, because
Really?
I've known John Garfield's daughter Julie for 25 years now.
Oh, wow.
And Julie made a documentary about her dad about that long ago. And they could not use anything from the Breaking Point in the documentary because the rights were all tied up with the Hemingway estate. It has something to do with the underlying literary rights to have an
Okay.
is why the film was not seen for as long as it was. But then all credit to Alexander. UCLA used to do this film series. I forget what it was called, but they would invite prominent directors to choose a favorite film and present it. And Alexander chose The Breaking Point. And they had to go out and like find it in order, and they wanted to make him happy, which was good. So they pried a print out of Warner Brothers. And then once that thing was out of the vault,
once it escaped containment,
then things started happening to actually bring the film back into circulation. And I wrote a story about this movie maybe 14 years ago, comparing all the adaptations of To Have and Have Not, because there are two more.
Right.
There's one that Don Siegel did called The Gun Runners, which is also based on To Have and Have Not. And there's an Iranian film that was made in the 70s. That's the same thing. But now I lost track of what I was saying. Alexander, once the film came out, then Scorsese actually got involved with doing a restoration of the film. So the Film Foundation actually put up the money to restore the film, which I was greatly upset about because I wanted to have the Film Noir Foundation, my foundation, restore the film. But that's a good thing when you're competing with Martin Scorsese to restore a film. That's a good.
Absolutely.
You know it's going to get done.
Absolutely. Well, however it happened, I'm glad that it did, because there's a beautiful Criterion Blu-ray, which is how I saw it for the first time a few years ago and rewatched it now, and now everyone can enjoy this really breathtaking piece of work. All right, friends, let's talk about the release and reception of The Breaking Point, which opened in New York City on October 6th, 1950. Also playing in New York on that day, one of the all-time great femme fatales, Barbara Stanwyck, in The Furies, Disney's Treasure Island, Powell and Pressburger's The Red Shoes, Ealing Studios' Kind Hearts and Coronets, Jane Wyman and Kirk Douglas in The Glass Menagerie, William Holden in Union Station, The Men, featuring a promising newcomer who came up earlier in the show named Marlon Brando, a big re-release of Chaplin's City Lights, and a couple of noteworthy films noir, the aforementioned No Way Out, and also Edge of Doom was playing this weekend. So not a bad...
Edge of Doom is a terrible movie, but it's extraordinary. What a lineup of films, huh? Like that was a week of movie going in New York in 1950. Yep. I mean, it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, a lot of nice choices at the movie palaces. Mike, what were the news headlines on that day?
Saturday, September 30, 1950, Police Commissioner Thomas F. Murphy busted 336 plainclothes police down to shoe leather duty in an attempt to battle corruption. This is a real story from the New York Times, even though it sounds like maybe the greatest noir movie. Some combination of Breaking Point and Serpico, I don't know. The impacted unit was mostly assigned to gambling. And I guess too many of their wives wore fur coats to the Christmas party or something, because they got busted down as a unit. The recommendation was that their spots get filled by people who'd been on the force for less than a year. So they went from having a bunch of guys who were on the take to a bunch of guys who were scared to fucking death. They didn't even go in the den. You know what I mean? Like
a bunch of guys who weren't on the take yet.
There you go. Yes.
There you go. In the hot as hell Korean War, the United Nations agreed that General Douglas MacArthur would be empowered by himself as an individual to decide the terms that would end the Korean War.
Oh.
They were assuming they would be in control of the country after the war was over, but Big D got to be the one who decided when that is. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Like one guy gets to be like, nah, fuck them, we're still fighting. It's very hard for us to picture personalities that big.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, who would that be now? Like Elon Musk? Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah,
I mean,
done here. Jesus.
Yeah.
And finally, in Dearborn, Michigan, Miss Clara Bryant Ford, the widow of Henry and survivor of son Edsel, died at 2 a.m. 14 hours after being admitted to the Henry Ford Hospital with a heart ailment. Apparently, she was the power behind the throne while the two men were in charge of the company, but I don't know very much about her. What do you think the chances are she was a nice person? I think there's at least a 50% chance that this counts as us celebrating the death of a Nazi. Anyway, that's headlines. Jason, what did the critics have to say about The Breaking Point?
Good things, Mike. New York Times critic Bosley Crowther wrote, Warner Brothers, which has already taken one feeble swing and a cut at Ernest Hemingway's memorable story of a tough guy to have and have not, finally has got hold of that fable and socked it for a 4-base hit in a film called The Breaking Point, which came to the Strand yesterday. All of the character color and cynicism of Mr. Hemingway's lean and hungry tale are wrapped up in this realistic picture, and John Garfield is tops in the principal role. Agreed. The Associated Press deemed it crackling good drama. John Garfield plays a ship operator who is forced by adversity to engage in some shady enterprises. He carries off the role with conviction and is aided by Patricia Neal and Phyllis Thaxter and some of the saltiest dialogue heard on the screen in recent years. And
That's a
we
perfect
usually
40s 1950 word to describe it.
It is. We do usually try to stick to contemporaneous reviews in this segment, but I would be remiss not to quote from the Criterion essay for the picture from friend of the show Stephanie Zacharek, who compared it to Casablanca thus: a more piercing and complex picture, one that even today speaks boldly to the fractured notion of what it means to be an American. Its view of love is bracingly adult, but also infinitely tender, and it is idealistic only in the sense that it understands just how hard it can be in a cruel world for a man to live up to his ideals. If Casablanca is the great Hollywood film of our dreams, The Breaking Point is the quiet masterpiece for our waking moments. Ooh.
That's
That
well
lady can write.
done.
Well said, Stephanie. How did it do in terms of box office and awards, Mike?
Try as we might, we could not dig up its box office grosses, and it was snubbed by the Oscars. But in the Photoplay Monthly Awards, it was awarded as one of the best pictures of the month, and its three leads, Garfield, Neal, and Thaxter, were among the performers honored with the best performances of the month, richly deserved. And I'm going to say that without the internet search functions, you never would have gotten deep enough in the card catalog to find that information. Good job, Jason Bailey. That's some real research right there. Photoplay Monthly Awards, bro. You went deep in the well for that one.
Well, I can tell you a little bit more about why this film tanked at the box office.
Please do.
I had Sherry Jackson as a guest one time at a festival, and Sherry plays one of Garfield's daughters in the film.
Okay, awesome.
And Sherry's had I can't remember, it was an uncle or a cousin or somebody who worked at the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And this was right at the time that I'm going to just say her uncle, his name was Montgomery Tully was the guy's name, was in Jack Warner's office before this film came out. And that's when they learned that Garfield had been named as a fellow traveler in Red Channels, the notorious anti-communist, thing. And they said, well, there goes that. And so honestly, Warner Brothers withdrew virtually all the promotion from the film. They did not get behind it. And so any hope for this to be nominated for Oscars or anything was right down the toilet, because Jack Warner said, I'm not promoting a communist.
Yeah.
And Garfield was not a communist. That's it's kind of absurd.
Yeah.
He didn't have politics were not a thing. Now his wife, Robbie, was clearly she had been a card-carrying member of the Communist Party during the 1930s.
As good Americans were allowed to be.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not what this show is about.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, it was not against the law. It was not against the law, to be a member of a political party. But anyway, that's what Sherry told me was like Warner Brothers just gave up on him at that
Yeah.
point, you know. And he
And
only,
he only
had,
made-
I think, one more
Yeah.
film left in him.
Yeah. Yeah, he ran all the way the following year, and then he
Right, which was an independent production and was eventually distributed by United Artists and not by Warner Brothers.
Yeah, and then passed in 1952. Yeah, that courage and conviction that the studio heads so acquitted themselves with during the blacklist.
Oh my God!
Now it's time for a segment we call Double It Up, where we each select one movie that we think would make an ideal double feature with today's focal film. Mr. Muller, you're our guest, which means you go first.
Oh my God, that's a tough one. Well, you know, as a programmer, I'm crazy because I always imagine like showing multiple versions of the same story.
Yeah.
Oh, I love
Absolutely.
that. I love it.
You know, so I mean, you could do a four-part thing with this and show all the versions of To Have and Have Not. And I just want to chime in, and I never miss the opportunity to take a rip at Bosley Crowther, who's like the resident curmudgeon of the New York Times, right? Who never saw a genre movie that he liked. Never saw a genre movie that he liked.
Yes.
And
when he bothered to see them at all, when he wasn't
on him. Right, because the way he described the novel To Have and Have Not in his review of The Breaking Point convinces me that he never actually read it.
Of course.
Right? Because that is not a lean, hungry, it's a meandering, drunken narrative. And so I don't think he even read the book, right?
That makes sense.
You know who originally owned this book was Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes bought the book originally, and Howard Hawks bought the rights from Howard Hughes and then sold them to Warner Brothers to make the original version of the film, because he told Hemingway, this is I love this story. I hope it's not apocryphal because I just love it.
If it's not true, it should be.
Yeah, and Howard Hawks said, I can make a good movie from your worst book. Which is a great way to talk to an author, right?
Absolutely.
And Hemingway says, "Oh, really? And which one would that be?" And Hawks said, "That piece of crap To Have and Have Not." And it took, so just because that's the way Howard Hawks was, he bought the rights from Howard Hughes and then sold them to Warner Brothers and said, "This is the story I want to make," and then completely trashed the entire book and told Jules Furthman. And quite honestly, I think Jules Furthman wrote like 85% of that screenplay. I think
if that, if not more.
They would bring Faulkner in to juice up dialogue and stuff, But let's face it, William Faulkner was not a structuralist. That was not his thing, right?
Yeah.
So Jules Furthman wrote that screenplay. Much like nobody is giving credit to Faulkner for The Big Sleep. He wrote a couple of scenes in The Big Sleep, but he did not write the script. Yeah. Anyway, so that's my answer. I would pair it with to Bogart Bacall, To Have and Have Not.
There we go. My pick, I decided to lean in on my other favorite John Garfield performance, which is in the 1948 picture Force of Evil, co-written and directed by the great Abraham Polanski. This was a film that came on my radar because of the aforementioned Martin Scorsese's personal journey through American cinema, where he devotes a fair amount of time to talking about Polanski and talking about this picture in particular. And then I revisited it when I was writing my book about the great New York movies, because it is a terrific, some incredible, late 40s New York photography, including like up in kind of like Washington Heights and George Washington Bridge areas that frankly aren't really even photographed that often now. But it is a lean, mean, terrific, tough little noir with a cold, hard spirit to it, and Garfield is just spectacular in it. It's one of his best performances.
Well, those are my two favorite Garfield movies. That's it. Breaking Point and Force of Evil.
Simpatico with Eddie Muller. I'm putting it in my social media bio. Mike, what's your pick, buddy?
I also like to see different versions of the same thing. So I tried to watch the 4 other movies called Breaking Point, and none of them are remakes of this, and none of them have anything to do with To Have and Have Not, and it was very fucking annoying. One of them stars Busta Rhymes, is terrible. I mean, it was really, really a very annoying road that I tried to walk. I did not finish any of the other Breaking Points, frankly, and will be impressed with you if you do. So when that plan absolutely utterly caved and turned into a complete catastrophe, I started looking at other 1950 movies and was reminded of 7-Eleven Ocean Drive. Also a noir. And the thing about the reason why I think it pairs really nicely with Breaking Point is because, like, imagine if in the beginning of Breaking Point, he dropped off the Chinese guys, they all tipped him really well, and then he went and started a whole moving Chinese guys to San Diego racket. Because what happens in 7-Eleven Ocean Drive is the guy starts off as just like a phone tech dude, and he just kind of comes in to help them, you know, sort of be like tech support in this bookie's office. And then as it sort of goes, he figures out, like, oh, now you're making like 5 times more money than you were before, all because of the shit that I did. You got to start cutting me in, bro. And he starts getting thug on this guy. And it's sort of, so you see this dude go from being, you know, like, he's literally like, he pulls his like union employee badge off of his shirt after the first big meeting with the gangster guy. So like, it couldn't be more of sort of a working class character who then goes on to become like basically the West Coast Michael Corleone, all in this one movie. It's like, so it just sort of, it's a really fascinating, there's how many gangster movies are there like that, you know, where you see a guy sort of like go from 0 to 100 in that sort of way.
Well, there were a lot in the 1930s, in the early 1930s, but your 7-Eleven Ocean Drive is a really cool pick because it's not a particularly well-known movie, but you're describing it very, very well and very accurately. Yeah, he becomes Mr. Big, you know.
The other thing that's so cool about it is the end of the movie, where this, you know, this is a Code Era movie. It's not gonna fucking go well for this guy.
Sure.
I mean, you know, he's not just
he's not riding
like
off into the
sail
sunset.
off into the sunset, right, in his new yacht. So like, it gets to the end of the movie, and everybody's sort of converging on him, and he's sort of trying to get away with the girl and everything. And what they end up in is it Hoover Dam, right?
Boulder Dam.
They end up at this, and so they're taking a tour through a dam, and so it's like a national park thing, and they're in this group, and there's like 20 people sort of around them, and they're just like doo-doo-doo. Meanwhile, they got gangsters and cops, and I mean, Jesus is chasing after him, like everybody's coming for him, and they're just sort of in this tour group listening to this guy talk about the stats of this dam. It was a really creative way to like, it's a very tense end of the movie, even though it's moving at like national park pace, which that's another thing that like I can't think of very many things that do that. Like, that's something that even when people do it, they don't do it for like 20 fucking minutes. Like, they really do it at the end of 7-Eleven Ocean Drive. So that's my answer.
Very cool.
Excellent. All right, Eddie, the book again is, and I'm going to get the title right this time, Dark City Dames, The Women Who Defined Film Noir, revised and expanded edition, on shelves Tuesday from Running Press. And of course, Noir Alley is on TCM each Saturday at midnight, with an encore on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Can people follow you on social media? How's their best way to keep track of you?
EddieMuller.com or NoirCity.com, because, you know, I take my Noir City Film Festival around the country, 9 different cities now every year. So if you want to know if we're coming near you, you can check it out at NoirCity.com. And if you're interested in what we do at the Film Noir Foundation, where we restore movies, that's filmnoirfoundation.org, because that is a nonprofit. That I can't believe we've been doing this for 15 years now or more.
Wow.
Than 15 years. We've restored like over, I think we're up to like 33 or 34 movies now that we've restored, which is pretty great. And I want to point out that that's all money largely from fans who love this stuff. I mean, that's where most of the money comes from. I mean, it's not like we're getting, the Hollywood Foreign Press has given us money over the years, but most of the money just comes from very devoted fans, and it's
Beautiful.
greatly appreciated.
I mean, that's the thing. If we're going to have a culture, if we're going to have a community, then we have to build and sustain it, right? I mean, so obviously you are part of building it, and you know, people need to sustain it. I mean, having physical media like you're talking about, going to festivals when you see a screening and somebody's going to sit and talk about it for 20 minutes beforehand, go show up, because then it'll encourage them to do that again. I mean, so if we're going to have a community and a culture, we have to build it and sustain it on our own. You know, because the breaking point isn't making money like that.
Well, Mike, you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And it's funny, when I started doing this, you know, I got into it just like we're doing right now. I mean, I'm doing this because I have a book that I'm promoting, right? But I would have done it anyway, right, to talk about the breaking point. But originally, I started doing film festivals as a way to promote my books, right? And then I realized I'd ask for a movie. I want to show the breaking point. They'd say, "Oh, you can't. You can't." And I started to learn, you know, 25 years ago, like, this stuff can disappear if you're not careful. And so I created the Film Noir Foundation to save the movies. But then when I started going out and showing them, I realized, you know, there's a lot of movie theaters that are in this same precarious situation. Like, if we don't get people in here in these seats, the theaters are going to disappear, right? And so it was like, okay, so I'm taking my movies to theaters where they work so that the movies can help sustain the theaters. Now I realize we got to sustain the audience, right? So I do believe that this is one of the reasons that I got my gig on Turner Classic Movies, was because TCM sent people to my screenings at all these Noir City festivals. And they said, you know, look at the audience this guy is attracting. It's a pretty wide range of ages and gender. I mean, my audience is completely 50-50 gender-wise. And they said, you know, this is what we need. Because TCM, you know, obviously TCM has to find a way to appeal to younger viewers, or it's not going to work. You know, I mean, eventually it's going to dissolve, right? If you don't keep that, and the trick is to do that without compromising the integrity of the films themselves. I mean, we're not cutting these down to TikTok bites, you know. I mean, the idea is to learn how to watch a movie all the way through at its pace, right? So, this is all very important stuff that I didn't even realize I was doing when I started out. But what you said, Mike, is absolutely true. You know, you got to be able to sustain this and to keep people watching these things. And you read dire prognostications about how, you know, the kids today won't watch these movies. I can attest to you that is not true, because I have a huge fan base that's very young. Teenagers come to the shows. They want to know. The challenge is the people that run the business don't think anything is worthwhile if it's not making them $10 million, right? These movies aren't going to make anybody millions of dollars, but that is not the reason you sustain this stuff. At a certain point, it's not about the money. It's about our cultural legacy. And if you think it's only has value if it's putting a bunch of money in somebody's pocket, then you're the problem. You're part of the problem, not part of the solution, right? So, anyway, thank you. Thank you for giving me those few moments to jump on that soapbox.
Absolutely.
You had to push me off of it, so I'm happy to...
There it is. I'm Jason Bailey on Blue Sky and Letterboxd. Mike, where can people follow you?
I am Fifth Column Films on Instagram and Blue Sky.
And of course, if you like the show and think other people might like it too, please leave us a rating and or review on your podcatcher of choice. If you'd like to join our mailing list and get weekly show notes and such, including some good clips of Eddie and Alexander Payne talking about this movie, you can do that at buttondown.email/filmfanatic. And my new book, Gandolfini, Jim, Tony, and the Life of a Legend is out April 29th. Please pre-order if you're so inclined. And of course, if you're one of those freaks who likes to watch videos of people recording a podcast, find us on YouTube at our channel, Guide for the Film Fanatic.
Our humblest thanks to our guiding light, Mr. Danny Perry, author of Guide for the Film Fanatic, and shout out to executive producer Blake Howard, who doesn't like cockfights. All that trouble for an egg.
Thank you again, Eddie Muller, for coming on the show and for all of the work that you do to keep this vibrant film genre alive.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. And I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you for listening. Next time on Guide for the Film Fanatic, TCM host and author Alicia Malone joins us to discuss Peter Weir's Picnic at Hanging Rock. See you then.